Alrighty, friends. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce our next presenter. This is Kelly Edwards, who is going to talk about successful habits and behaviors for college student success. She's going to specifically talk about agency and responsibility, how to be successful in college. Kelly is a part of our As You Are team here at Appalachian State University and is a close colleague of mine. So I'm so excited to moderate this session for her and to just introduce her to you guys. She has a background in social work, school psychology, and has been with us since this summer, 2021. And this is a presentation that she collaborated with her father, Keith Edwards, who is at the Southern Illinois University of Edwardsville. And he's not able to be with us today. So Kelly is flying solo, and I'm confident she's going to do an amazing job. So this is Kelly, and I'll let Kelly take it from here.
Thank you for that introduction. As Ellen said, my name is Kelly Edwards, and I have the privilege of working with some pretty awesome folks here with the As You Are program at Appalachian State. As Ellen also mentioned, I got my undergrad degree in social work, and then I went on to get my graduate degrees in clinical child and school psychology. So to say that I have some experience with college, both being a student and a staff member, is a pretty safe statement to make. And as she mentioned, this presentation is in collaboration with my father, Keith Edwards, and we like to joke that even though it is Southern Illinois University of Edwardsville, it was not named after us. So just to make that clear. So moving along, this is Keith Edwards. He originally created this presentation for his first year college students at SIUE. He is an English rhetoric and composition professor. It wasn't always this way, though. His hometown is Alton, Illinois. He grew up in a working class single parent household, and he is actually a first generation college student as well. He briefly attended community college after high school, but then left for a variety of reasons. And he worked in the construction and building trade for 20 plus years before returning to college at 43. And when he returned, he earned an undergraduate degree as well as a graduate degree. So his background is pretty varied, and he takes this insight from his background to help really support his students as whole people. And he wanted to make sure I mentioned that his background and his philosophy is that education is really created and knowledge is really created. It's a communal thing between professors and students. So what did Keith wish he knew years ago when he returned to college or when he started college the first time? There's multiple things that he would tell you, but this is a list of his top 10 things here. First and foremost, you are responsible for all the information presented in class. This can be through presentations, discussions between yourself and the professor, or group discussions. You have to know how to take notes in a way that makes sense to you. Professors won't always tell you to write this down or this is important. It's an assumed knowledge that this is important, and it might be on an exam later, or it might need to be used later. Also, there's not always going to be study guides or cheat sheets. That's something that might be pretty different from a high school experience. And taking notes in a way that makes sense to you is going to be helpful for later tasks, whether that's an exam, a paper, or whatever that might look like. Also, if you don't take the chance to refer back to those notes that you took, they're not going to be a whole lot of use. I call them folder fillers. If you don't refer back to them, all they do is fill up a folder for you. So taking those notes in a way that makes sense and in a way that you can record that important information is a great skill to have and an important skill for success. This next one here, officially, according to college rules and regulations, students don't have to be there. It's not mandatory attendance as elementary school, middle school kind of thing is. And technically instructors don't really have to care, which sounds harsh, and it can be harsh, but the reason that instructors are there and the reason they go into education is because they do care. However, they're not obliged to provide this additional assistance or make exceptions for students who cannot do the work or maybe refuse to do the work. There's often a little bit of both. It's your responsibility to learn that information, and that responsibility exceeds the instructor's responsibility to teach. Which again, harsh, I'm jumping right at you with this harsh information here. But the good news is that there's resources available. There's a ton of resources available to help you meet those needs. And often these are resources like tutoring, advising, reaching out to other professionals on campus. For example, one of my students recently reached out to me about a paper that he was writing. It involved a lot of formatting, and it's been since about the Stone Age, since I've been in college. So I was more than happy to help with organization and brainstorming and things like that. But one of the things he and I talked about is what other resources are available to you on campus to help you be successful. So that was a really good conversation to have. Another point made on this slide here is protect your GPA. First and foremost, know what your GPA is. That is something that often goes kind of under the radar. It's not necessarily in the forefront of what you're concerned about on day-to-day things. Know that sometimes dropping a class is necessary, and that's okay. Your instructor isn't going to be mad at you. They're not going to take it personally. And in fact, a lot of instructors view it as more of a strength to know what your limits are and know when maybe taking the class at a later date is a better option, or switching to a different major is sometimes an option. A lot of college, to sound cliche, is getting to know yourself and really having those honest conversations with yourself about how you learn, who you are, and what you want to accomplish. So this next slide here is a big one. Education is designed to be taken and not given. You have the power here, and I like to say I promise I won't start singing, but the university is a resource for you, and you really must be proactive to really fully realize what you're capable of. You are here for a reason. You're here because you are capable, and the resources that are there, you just have to go get them. You have to ask questions, read flyers, just in general, be curious and be open to gaining this new knowledge. Like I said, you wouldn't have been accepted into college if you weren't capable. So it can be pretty intimidating, especially if you're not familiar with folks in your family or your close friends who may have gone to college. But you wouldn't have been accepted if you weren't capable. And the reason you're seeking out help or resources might be because you haven't done this before, or might be because you have a different style of learning. But don't let that be an excuse from you seeking out that information. It's a reason, not an excuse. Your professors are experts in their field, so start there. They're more than happy to answer questions, especially if you show initiative and reach out to them. There's usually one instructor per class and many students. Lessons are largely based on content rather than being geared toward your particular situation or skill set. That's okay though. I mean, think how boring college would be if it only went over things that you were familiar with. It wouldn't be effective either. I mean, you come to college to learn information. And so if we're only going over things that you're familiar with, that's not going to be great. Be proactive and seek out clarification. Like I mentioned, your instructor is your first resource. But beyond that, there's other campus resources like writing centers, other faculty members, tutoring labs, etc. When I personally made the move from social work to school psychology, there was no way that I could expect my advisor or my professors that I was familiar with to have all of the answers. And that's okay to not have answers. You're here to figure it out. And as someone who switched her own major a couple of times, you're figuring out who you are. and that's totally fine. Be an active participant in your education, no matter what field you go into. This next slide here points out that instructors are both gatekeepers and facilitators. So what I mean by that is that they are here to help you learn, but also part of their responsibility is to determine who can meet the expectations and who can't, and that's okay. This can be super intimidating at times, I'm going to be honest with you, but it's your responsibility to communicate your needs and your concerns or ask for clarification when you need to. One example I wanted to talk about here is that many of my awesome students that I get to work with receive accommodations through the Office's Disability Resources, or ODR, as I might call it. While this office communicates with professors and will send out emails, especially towards the beginning of the semester with accommodations, they are one office that's responsible for serving a whole population of students university-wide. I like to kind of think of this as similar to the previous class where there's one instructor and many students. This is one office and an entire university. So as you can imagine, that email or that communication can sometimes take a while to reach your professors. One thing I always like to tell folks is that if you are safe, feel safe in doing so, and physically safe is important, but also emotionally safe, which is a whole nother presentation I won't necessarily go into. Disclose your needs and disclose your accommodations to your professors. You can mention something along the lines of, I have a lot of difficulty sustaining focus during tests or exams. And one of the things that the university helps me with is I get to test in separate room during exams. You can say something like that. You can say, I've talked to the Office of Disability Resources, or even if you haven't yet, you can mention, hey, I have this difficulty, or I learn in this different way. Who can I talk to? The great thing about being at a university in general is that everybody is here because they want to learn. They want to help you in your educational journey. So I often say, I'm pretty well known for saying this to my students, I don't have the answers. I don't have all of the answers, but I'm more than happy to help you find them out. If you disclose these accommodations to your instructors, they might not have the answers for how to get you to the right spot, but they're going to help you find the person who does. That's a little tangent I always go on. Education requires engagement and proactivity. I'll warn you now, I'm going to say proactive a lot of times in this presentation. Students aren't just empty buckets that the instructor is pouring knowledge into and pouring information in. Instead, as the student, you bring your own experiences, you bring your own educational history, your strengths, your challenges to the situation. And you, between that and what your professor helps you learn, you create the knowledge together. You create the awareness of facts and history and science and whatever you're studying. But you have to be part of your education. You have the unique knowledge of what you know. You know how you learn. You know what's a weakness, what might be a strength for you. Metacognition, it's a big fancy word right there. But this is something that you alone know, and folks who might have worked with you for a while can help you figure out how to communicate that. And that's something that's really helpful in college. This note here, exceeds expectation does not mean meets expectation. That is a bit of a wordier way to say that A's are not easy to come by in college. And A's mean that you went above and beyond, essentially. You can't expect to procrastinate all semester and then ask for extra credit. Sometimes, many times actually, this is different for folks from their high school experience. You may have been able to get extra credit in high school. Oftentimes, extra credit doesn't exist in college. Sometimes it does, I will be honest, but I would say more often than not, it doesn't. Excuse me. You have to put forth your best effort throughout the semester. It's a whole lot easier to keep up with the assignments, to keep up with the workload, rather than to play catch up later on in the semester. A note here also is that lengthier essays and assignments and things like that are not necessarily better if they don't address the prompt provided or meet the expectations that the professor communicates earlier on in the semester. There are many strategies you can use to make sure you address the key points or the ideas. One of my favorites is an idea map. I tend to think of 16 different things when somebody gives me a topic. So getting that down in some of that pre-writing or that pre-work organization is going to help you in a lot of ways in multiple different classes, truthfully. This one here, I like to say it loud for everybody to hear. The diploma is not a receipt. You aren't just paying for a product. It's not as simple as going to the store and buying something off the shelf. Just because you're paying tuition doesn't mean that the professors are there to make it easy for you. They will oftentimes do what they can to make it approachable, which might make it a little bit easier, but it's not going to be easy. A diploma shows that the person whose name on it has at least a minimum proficiency in that area, meaning that they have a minimum level, at least a minimum level of knowledge to be considered someone who can earn a degree in that area, which is actually pretty cool. This puts a lot of value in a degree. Professors and other resources are there to help you. But one way to kind of think of it is that they want to work themselves out of a job. They want to teach you the critical thinking skills, and they want to teach you how to teach yourself, essentially. Think of it this way. You earn your degree, you're in the workforce, whatever your field is in the future, and you come up with a problem. You're not necessarily going to have your college professors there to help you through that problem or to learn strategies. What the professors want to accomplish is teaching you to think through it, teaching you how to think, which is a fun way to say it. Excuse me, if you're not capable of meeting those minimum requirements, you'll be lost in the workforce. And the professor doesn't want you to waste your time and doesn't want to waste their own time. So really, learning is cooperative there. This is another one that might sound a bit harsh at first, but no one is created equally or exactly the same. To put this simply, it just means that not a single person coming into that classroom, whether it's a student or whether it's the professor, has the exact same educational experience or personal experiences. You bring your own unique backgrounds to that classroom. And there might be people in your class that have super high skills in studying for tests. There might be folks who have really great organizational skills. But there's also going to be folks in that same class who have skills below yours. There's a whole range, there's a whole spectrum, if you will, of students in that class. But it's not going to, your information and your grades are not going to be what other people can do. I like to think of it as when you get your diploma, when you get your piece of paper, it doesn't have Professor Jones' class on it. It has your name. So you are responsible for getting that information and learning it in a way that makes sense to you. So you have been doing schooling for 12 plus years, which is an accomplishment in itself. But now it's time to redefine how you do school. A lot of your college education is going to be hands-on and learning through trial and error. Sometimes you're going to learn just as much through the trial and error, or just as much through getting it wrong the first time as you would otherwise. A personal example I like to give here, my very first paper that I wrote in graduate school, I felt confident about it. I'm like, okay, I'm in grad school now. I'm turning in this paper. I failed it. It was the biggest flop ever, which at the time was heartbreaking to me. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm terrible. This is so awful. I'm in the wrong field, etc. Took a bit of a moment for a pity party. But then I persevered through it, and I went to my professor and I asked these clarifying questions. And it turns out I completely misinterpreted some of the research that I did. But having learned that through failing per se, I now know the topic of that paper, which, if you're curious, theories of intelligence, I now understand that topic much more than I would had I not put in that time and effort. There are going to be times when you don't necessarily get the grade that you're hoping for. There's going to be times when you have to invest a lot more energy and time and effort into an assignment that you thought, man, this used to come more easily to me, or I maybe didn't have to necessarily study as much in high school. Another thing other than proactive that I'm going to say often is that college and high school are completely different worlds, which is an awesome thing, as well as kind of intimidating sometimes. Another thing here is don't be afraid to kind of take risks and think outside the box, come up with these new ideas, really participate in class. Participation is often a huge part of your grade, or at least a significant part in your grade. And the mention here about the syllabus or the syllabi is that professors often discuss what participation looks like or how participation is measured in the syllabus. So always check that syllabus to see how it's measured, because you want to know what you're being graded on. So here's that famous slide. What questions can I answer for you at this point? Anybody?
Kelly, I'm also not seeing any questions in the chat, but if folks are more comfortable just dropping their question there, I'll read it aloud for you. However you're most comfortable doing that is totally fine with us.
Yeah, we'll give it a minute or two, see if anything comes up.
Alrighty.
All right, so I'm not seeing much as far as questions coming in. Surprise, there's test. A lot of times that slide, any questions, is the last thing. But get out a piece of paper, you have a test. Think of this like college. I want to insert maniacal laughter here. It's not going to be graded, don't worry. But there's going to be 5 questions. You can write it on a piece of paper. You can think about the answers. It's totally up to you. So this first question here, what was the title of this presentation? Anybody know? Just give that some thought. I'll give you a second or two before moving on to the next question. I see Ellen raising her hand excitedly over there. I'm choosing not to call on Ellen. All right, question 2, define metacognition. So that's a fun one. Ellen is also probably excitedly waving her hands over there. She's a big fan of this word. Question 3, where does Keith Edwards live? Picture for a hint, but I did blank out the name of the town. And let's see. There we go. Question 4, explain the statement, education is not something that's done to you, it's something that's done with you. And enjoy the Harry Potter reference there. Big Harry Potter fan. And finally, question 5. Based on this presentation, and enjoy the Jeopardy music, based on this presentation, what do you think you need to change or work on in order to be successful in college? All right. So I kind of surprised you a bit there with the test. This is just a reflection slide. How'd you do? How do you think you did? I have some questions there to consider. It might be hard to get these questions correct if you didn't take notes or if you weren't able to refer back to your notes. This is something that can kind of surprise you in college. This is a real life example of going to class and then thinking maybe this information is important or isn't, but if you didn't take notes, it'd be hard to know. So just kind of going over the answers there in case you're curious. The title of this presentation, question 1, agency and responsibility, how to be successful in college. Question 2 is define metacognition. And that is just kind of an awareness or knowing your own thought process, how you learn, strengths and weaknesses, that sort of thing. Question 3, where does the creator of this presentation live? Keith Edwards lives in Alton, Illinois. Define, excuse me, education being a cooperative opportunity. And that basically is a way of saying that you bring your own experiences and understanding to help build that knowledge. You're the key player in your education, basically. A lot of time with that last question, what do you think you need to change or work on in order to be successful in college? One of the things that I see, for example, with a lot of my students is kind of a struggle with being accountable or being in charge of their own work, in charge of their own work effort and product. A lot of times going through elementary school, high school, and that sort of thing, you have a whole team of folks behind you, which is fantastic. But you have to, going forward in college, be the key player. You have to be the person that takes charge of what you are producing and what you're putting out there. Now I'm also going to say any questions, and this time I promise there's no more test. This is just the opportunity to have a discussion at the end of this presentation.
We've been having a great conversation with Sarah in the chat, Kelly. And so her question is, and I'll kind of give some context of her question, so you don't have to read our entire chat. But essentially, she was saying that accountability was something that was a big feature of your presentation and centered around being self-accountable. This is something challenging for her learner. And she's thinking that this might become the biggest barrier for him to overcome when it comes to transition to college. And so her question is, how do you address this? And what is the turning point or the thing, I'm going to assume that's meant to say thing, that causes the turning point for a student when it comes to personal responsibility and personal accountability?
That is actually a really great question because it's going to be slightly different for each student. One of the things that I have found most successful as someone who has worked with students in the K-12 world as well as students in the college world, one of the things that I have found most successful is to start gradually bringing more of the responsibility or more of the involvement in the learning process to your learners. Coming from an education perspective, an example that comes to mind is if your student has some accommodations in high school or has some educational goals that they're working towards in a particular plan, involve them in those conversations, involve them in those meetings. Maybe the goal is something that they can help put some input towards. Maybe they have additional goals they want to work towards. In the college realm of things, just kind of having these discussions and saying this is something that's really important moving forward. This is going to be a key to success. get your learners' input on that. Where are they as far as their mindset, and what do they think personally might be a biggest hurdle for them? A lot of times in this point, I would model just kind of some self-reflection. Like, I personally, going from high school to college, one of my struggles was XYZ. What do you think about this? And just really open up that communication and model that discussion.
Sarah says, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for your question.
Yeah. Kelly and I often use the question, if you're going to do it, how and when? Someone earlier, I think was in another presentation, was talking about, you know, having students kind of taking some responsibility. And I think Kelly tackled that awesome. So, other questions for Kelly? All righty.
All right. Well, thank you all for letting me present today. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have if you think of them later on. I believe my contact information should be in the toolbox. I'm happy to answer anything for you.
As a reminder to folks before you head out, we will be sending out an evaluation at the end of the day tomorrow. The first 10 folks to fill out that survey will get a free gift card as an incentive for taking care of that. Our review session in the morning will start at 10:30, and our first session with the 15-minute mini sessions will begin at 11 a.m. Eastern time. And we're just so excited that you guys could attend today. If you have any questions, please feel free to pass those along, but you'll be getting some information overnight and tomorrow with links and things like that, or you can visit the excuse me, you can visit the College Star Conference website or visit the program to access all of that information and those links for tomorrow. So thank you for being here.